You're listening to the Nourish Child Podcast, episode number 46.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey you, welcome back. Or if this is your first time here, thank you for tuning in and giving this show a try. I'm Jill Castle, a registered dietitian specializing in pediatric nutrition, and I host this show, the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy kids, inside and out. A lot has changed over the last 5 years in the area of infant feeding. New recommendations for the timing of food introduction, new food allergy guidelines, and progressive methods for feeding your baby are just a few of the changes. If you're a parent with a baby, you're gonna love this episode as I talk with Leslie Schilling, co-author of Born to Eat, Whole Healthy Foods from Baby's First Bite. Born to Eat is a book about starting solids with a focus on self-feeding and a baby-led weaning approach. Leslie co-wrote Born to Eat with Wendy Jo Peterson. Both are nutritionists and wellness experts who, in this book, provide age-based advice, step-by-step instructions, help for parents, and easy recipes so you can ensure that your infant is introduced to healthy and tasty food as early as possible. This episode of the Nourish Child Podcast is brought to you by the Kids Healthy Weight Project course. Do you feel like you somehow missed out on the basics of nourishing your child? You probably did. Many parents strive to nourish their child well, but find themselves with lots of questions. In the Kids Healthy Weight Project course, you will get my blueprint for nourishing healthy children, inside and out. That means you'll get a food system that includes a balance of all foods, not a restrictive meal plan or diet, a feeding strategy that is proven to be effective and nurturing to children, and an infrastructure for building healthy habits and a lifestyle your child can grow on. Get the Kids Healthy Weight Project today by going to www.jillcastle.com/courses. Before we get into the interview, I want to read the bios for both Leslie and Wendy. Leslie Schilling is a nationally recognized registered dietitian and nutrition expert. She's been featured in Women's Health, BuzzFeed, Yahoo News, The Huffington Post, U.S. News, and on HGTV. Leslie is a self-proclaimed anti-diet dietitian who teaches health through self-care and pleasurable eating. When she's not cooking with her family, she's likely shopping for ingredients near her home in Las Vegas, Nevada. Wendy Jo Peterson is a registered dietitian and culinary nutritionist. She is the co-author of the Mediterranean Diet Cookbook for Dummies and Adrenal Fatigue for Dummies. As with all military spouses, she wears many hats, but her favorite is her role as a mama. She splits her time between Austin, Texas, San Diego, California, and Europe. As always, you can find today's show notes with all the links I mentioned over on my website, www.jillcastle.com/046. And that's 046 for episode number 46. I love networking. I'm part of a podcast network called Parents on Demand, or the Pod Network. We are a network of fun and educational podcasts perfect for your family. You can explore the shows in the network by going to parentsondemand.com and searching specific categories. Parents on Demand also has a download for a free network app on iOS and Android, so you can listen to your favorite shows or find new podcasts. Subscribe through iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, or another provider. Every month, I will feature a podcast that I think will be helpful or of interest to you. Here's this month's podcast feature.
Hi, this is Dr. Mike from Nationwide Children's Hospital and host of PediaCast, a pediatric podcast for parents. Each week, we cover pediatric news, answer listener questions, and interview pediatric and parenting experts. You can find PediaCast wherever you get your podcasts and on the web at pediacast.org. We care about the health and well-being of your kids and family, and we'd love to have you join us on PediaCast.
Here's Leslie. Hey, Leslie. Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad you're here. And I don't know if my audience, well, I'm sure my audience wouldn't know, but we used to be Tennessee neighbors.
That's right. Now we're both gone.
And they're living without us.
I know. With the humidity. So.
With the humidity. Exactly.
Well, I describe myself as an anti-diet dietitian. I believe in body self-regulation, and I like to help people find their nutrition intuition and use their nutrition intelligence. And I'm also a sports dietitian. So that's pretty much what I do. I'm in Las Vegas now, and I have private clients that I see here one-on-one, and I do a decent amount of sports nutrition out here in the desert and do the sports nutrition for Cirque du Soleil performers. And having been a former gymnast, they're my people. It's a lot of fun to work with the performers and athletes out here. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of a dancer / athlete. That's a little different, right?
Dancers, contortionists, gymnasts, trapeze artists. You name it.
Wow.
They do it at Cirque du Soleil. They do it.
I didn't know that. That's really awesome. And I always, before we get into the interview, and we're going to talk about the book and baby-led weaning and developing that healthy relationship with food from the very, very beginning. But before we get into that, I always like to ask my interviewees what food and eating was like for them as a child, and how does it influence your work with clients and or even perhaps your own family?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, I think how you grow up around food does shape so much of your life. So when I was growing up, both my parents enjoyed cooking. So that was a really neat thing. They enjoyed cooking. My dad was kind of the breakfast guy and the grill master. And my mom, we always had our standard dishes that she would make, and we ate a lot of chicken. My dad always said he was going to grow feathers, but family meals were very important, and I didn't realize that it's just something we did. It wasn't like, we're going to have a family meal, you guys need to get around the table, but it was just something we did. And I was very fortunate that was kind of an important thing in my family. And that's where we talked about the day. My dad told ridiculous jokes, and, and I remember things like, the phone would always ring during dinner. My dad would tell funny jokes. And so it was a positive experience for me. My grandmother was a nurse. She was also a chronic dieter. And she talked about dieting a lot. And I luckily made it through high school pretty much unscathed by diet culture and those types of things. And I was a competitive athlete. I was a gymnast. And so luckily for me, I just ate. I had a really beautiful protective filter or bubble that I lived in, and I just ate whatever I wanted, and I stopped when I was satisfied. And there was still that diety stuff that I'd hear like good food, bad food kind of from my grandmother, who obviously well-meaning. She was a nurse, and at that time, that's pretty much what people did to be healthy. And then went to college and realized that having fueled my body as a gymnast, and started out pre-med and biology, and I was going to do forensics, and then ran into nutrition, and it all just kind of clicked, because I was like, oh, I was a gymnast, I'm an active person, and this whole feeding your body fuel, it just made a lot of sense. And then looking back, as I started doing nutrition, I exercised and lift weights and ran and kept doing active things even when I wasn't a gymnast, and really understood the athlete mindset, because sometimes it's not really about health. A lot of times it's not really about health. Definitely two different animals. And that really helped me kind of going into my career, is having had an athlete mindset, but also having had a healthy relationship with food, and being able to see places in my family where there was a lot of dieting stuff and even some disordered stuff around food and body. And then I just kind of fell into working with people who have disordered eating or clinical eating disorders and sports nutrition. And that history just all clicked. I had a friend with a very severe eating disorder. My grandmother had her chronic dieting stuff. And so it definitely makes a difference. And I was, fortunate to have a great foundation with food growing up and be aware of diet culture, but it didn't really stick to me. I was very, very lucky.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, it definitely influences everything that I do. And with the sport background and having worked with lots of different types of athletes, people are like, "See, you wrote a book about feeding kids. I mean, why would you write a book about that when you work with athletes?" Well, I had owned my practice long enough in Memphis, about 10 years, to where I was getting athletes that I started with coming back, having had children. And they were like, "I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I have trouble feeding myself, and now I have this kid, and I don't want them to have the same problems that I have." And so it really has all come full circle with Born to Eat.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So just to back up a little bit, we do have a commonality, another commonality. My grandmother was also a nurse. And when I remember growing up, my mother was a great cook, and she was one of those people that once a week she would pick some random recipe, and make a new recipe every week. And so that really stuck with me. But it was my grandmother who I stayed with for a week when my youngest sister was born, and my grandmother packed us lunches, and my mother used to pack us sandwich, piece of fruit, and some cookies. That was my growing up, going to school packed lunch. But my grandmother packed a sandwich, cut up fruit, fresh vegetables, no real like sweets or treats or sneaky snacks. And it was such a contrast.
Mm-hmm.
And such a big influence too, because she was a nurse, and she, of all the people in my family, including my parents and my aunts and uncles, she really embodied sort of this healthy eating, things from the garden, homemade foods, balance, color. And it's amazing. So we do have that grandmotherly commonality. The other thing that you said, there were a couple things that you said, but I wanted to back up a little bit. You said you were protected from the diet culture, that you moved through your childhood and your teenage years and those early adult years unscathed. What do you think were the factors that protected you from diet culture?
I think this probably protects me from a lot of things. And I didn't realize it until I was much older, is that there are times when I'm like, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I don't really care what anybody else has to think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of had that attitude, which, bless my mom's heart for having to deal with me growing up. But there were times when people were doing stuff, and I was just like, that's stupid. Because I remember my grandmother talking to my mom and my sister, and then my sister was doing like a workout video. And I remember to this day, she's doing some type of hip lift from Jane Fonda, and I am sitting on the couch eating a piece of cheesecake watching her. And I just remember thinking, what is wrong with these people? Our bodies are just doing what they're supposed to do. And so I was really lucky to have that. Of course, I did the diet here and there and stuff like that. But I luckily didn't fall into something clinical or even subclinical. Of course, there's those, I think the typical body image things that teenagers and early adults go through. The most triggering thing for me growing up was having to do some of the things we had to do in my nutrition program. So, but yeah, that was probably one of the things that was, if I had to go back and do that over again, I'm like, no, I think this is a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Let's not do this to people. But yeah, I was very fortunate. And I just think it's part of my personality type, because people dieted in my family, my mom, my sister, my grandmother. But I think my personality type, and I was really into gymnastics and doing my own thing. And I think that was what just protected me, really.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I do find that there's always some sort of protective factors in play. Like my family didn't diet. My mother was not a dieter, but she was a smoker and would go all day without eating and then have a huge meal at the end of the day. Never very concerned with what foods she ate or how much or anything like that. So, and I think my other protective factor, honestly, was how naive I was. Like I was clueless. I wasn't looking at magazines or watching pop culture. I wasn't allowed. I was really sheltered and literally clueless. And that helped me because it kept me protected.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure I had an element of that as well, because my sister grew up on every magazine, teen magazine, 17, all of them. She loved the magazines, and she just loved reading them and keeping up with them. And I agree. And I would be at a friend's house who I didn't know till, looking back, and, who had a definite clinical eating disorder. and things even my grandmother did at time. Like looking back, knowing what I know now, I was like, it was under my nose my whole life, and I didn't know it until I looked back.
Mm-hmm.
So
interesting. Well, it makes total sense to me as a dietitian to see how your career has fed into sort of this next phase of your career, and that's as an author. I mean, I do think that everything comes around, and once you may have one interest in one area of nutrition, and then you have kids, and all of a sudden, I mean, it's in your face every day. You have to have an interest in kids' nutrition. It's so naturally, there and present right in your face every single day. When you decided to write Born to Eat, and I want you, this is sort of a two-part question because I want you to share with the audience, what Born to Eat really is to you as the author, but also I want you to share sort of, this is not just a baby-led weaning book. It is a baby-led weaning book, but it's more than that. It's what I got out of it when I read it. I sense that that's what you're hoping that others will get out of it too. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So, Born to Eat started out as my blog, like 6 or 7 years ago. So the Born to Eat blog, and it's just something, I guess, it always made sense to me. I'm like, we're born to eat. And I worked in a university setting with research preschool and all of that stuff. And you just watch the kids eat, and we're born to eat. We've just got these beautiful skills. And so it went from a blog to having my daughter, and just knowing that we were not going to do baby food. I knew that probably it was after she was born, not before. It was after she was born. Someone actually gave me the book, Baby Led Weaning by Jill Rapley, who is wonderful. And she was a manuscript reviewer for us for Born to Eat. And so it just made so much sense. And then I was like, I am not making baby food. This is amazing. I'm not going to do it. And it wasn't at that point, it wasn't from a science perspective, even though it really made sense. And in her book, it was from like, I don't know if I'm lazy or what, but I did not want to make baby food. So I don't want to do it. And then, it made sense. And having had my background working with the clients I've worked with who, were just active people or, families or whatever, having their own kids and not feeling very equipped in diet culture, it was on the back burner for a little bit. Born to Eat was after my little girl was getting older. And then Wendy Jo Peterson, my co-author, she texted me and she's like, so are we doing Born to Eat or not? Because at that point she was starting to feed solids to her little girl, Anya. And then it just happened. I pulled out the proposal. We tweaked it. We put her, very culinary spin in it as well. And just all the research at this point, there was more research coming out and larger studies, and we still need a lot more, but there's a lot coming out, and it just made sense to us. And so Born to Eat came about. And the thing I was really excited about it, because when I first thought about Born to Eat, and I'm glad it didn't happen like right when I wrote the proposal really early on, I'm glad it didn't happen then, because I don't know that I would have had the idea to really make it more than the feeding method of kind of a baby-led weaning approach. It's kind of, that's very flexible, but baby-led weaning approach, but to say that this is the time we can really support a child in their own body trust and help reboot the family at the same time amidst living in diet culture. And that's when we got really excited about it. So it's not just a feeding method. It's a philosophy about helping the whole family regain and support body trust.
Yeah. And that's honestly what I love so much about it, and what really, spoke to me. And, it's funny, when Mary Ann Jacobson and I were writing Fearless Feeding back in 2011, it was all about making baby food. And we were sort of like rolling our eyes, and nothing negative about making your own baby food. I'm to each his own, figure out what works great for you and go for it. But at the time there was, and you probably remember this because I think your daughter, this was right around the time that you were having your daughter, but the whole homemade baby food and all the stuff that you buy to make the baby food, and all this emphasis and interest and process was playing out. And what I was seeing in my own practice on my end were babies who were still on baby food at 13 months, still on baby food at 14 months. And I'm going, people, this is a 2-month tops time frame. This is not what you're doing for the first year, for the second 6 months of life. This is a very brief flirtation with pureed foods, and off you go. You move forward. So
right.
It does not surprise me. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is here we are in, 2016, 2017. Your book just came out this past May, and our emphasis on feeding is still very strong, but we're looking at different ways of feeding baby. So we've moved past, the homemade baby food. And so I think for me, as somebody who's been in pediatric nutrition for so long, and I've seen all these different phases come and go, they get popular, they fade. To me, what's important is, the baby-led, people absolutely need to know how to do baby-led weaning, and we're going to talk about that a little bit here in a second. But I think what just sings to me from your book is this idea of preserving what's innate in a baby's ability to self-regulate and helping actually the family get on board and really strengthening a foundation that is oftentimes overlooked until much later in life.
Yeah, and it's like feed the baby, but we're all focused on feed the baby, or get the baby food or whatever we're doing, and we forget that it's really feed the family. And how can we do that and make it beneficial and easier for parents too? So, and that's the beauty, I think, of Born to Eat. We had a lot of parents, we did some surveys a long time ago about it, but we had a lot of parents who said people kind of looked down on us. These were their answers. If we said, did you use whole food, or, how did you do it? Did you use kind of this approach? And they were like, yeah, but people were like, telling us we were lazy. And one mom was just so funny. She was like, I actually was lazy because I was just not going to do it. I decided, and it worked. And so it's like, it worked. And the other thing is, like, we have this kind of, I feel like it's a common sense background of, like, this is how humans ate for thousands of years, and we made it. So, but yeah, there's a lot more coming out on it now, and it is becoming very, very popular. And then you've got kind of the baby-led weaning purist, and we're pretty flexible. And in the book, we really make a point to say, you can do it part way, you can do it this way, you can do it that way. It's like, you do what's best for you, but let baby lead the way.
Right. And so just for the listeners who might not completely understand and know what baby-led weaning is, can you go ahead and just define that?
Yeah, baby-led weaning is basically your infant beginning foods, eating the foods of the family. So, and they're self-feeding. And so I think if you've got some purists that so they're self-feeding. So you put the food in front of them and they pick it up and they eat it. Now we've had some people who are like, oh yeah, so baby goes to the grocery store. Like, there are a lot of black and white thinkers out there.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, I'm like, so baby's not standing at the grill, making steak. Let's use our brains too. But we have a lot of people who leave some sarcastic comments, but I get it. It doesn't make sense to some people, but yeah, so baby is self-feeding foods of the family. For example, one of Cece's first foods was steak, and we do flat iron steaks a lot in our house, and we just grill it, and we would cut it off like in a finger, and it would go on her plate, and we'd have like a slice of avocado, and she would just go to town. And so really it's letting baby self-feed foods of the family. And if you do a modified, which is really what our approach is modified, and people are so kind of strict, and not strict, but they're people who are purist about using it, but we use more modified, which is making sure certain textures are taken care of. Like, you want steak cooked a certain way, you want broccoli cooked a certain way. If you're going to serve this, that, and the other, you want to make sure it's cut a certain way. So we use it, modified, and we're not going to put like a 2x2 inch square of lasagna in front of an infant. We're going to tell you how to serve that.
Right. And then in terms of, there are different segments, you're right, the purists and the more modified, flexible feeders. Where do you find, just in your experience writing the book and the comments and running your Facebook page, where do you find that parents are getting stuck the most?
I mean, we get a lot of questions, and I'm trying to think about what might be the most common. I will say we're finding a couple things. We're finding parents who are getting the book probably at, say, 9 and 10 months who saw their child gag and it freaked them out, and so they just stopped. And now their kids are actually behind on progressing the textures. So we'll get I'm stuck because the gagging thing freaked me out. And it's very unusual to have a true choking experience, although it does happen. But I think when parents know the difference between that, they feel a little more confident if they get through one gagging episode. So that's where they get stuck. And sometimes people have been getting stuck when their child's just not showing interest in what the food that they're putting on the plate. And that's really of just like, you just keep trying, just keep swimming. If they're putting foods in their mouth and they were interested in that and they met developmental milestones, and that's when, and you started, just, keep doing it. And remember that food at this point it's about learning and skill and not nourishment, because the full nourishment is still coming from either formula or breast milk.
What would you say the most important things parents should keep in mind if they use the baby-led weaning approach?
Well, I mean, safety, for sure. Safety, never leaving your child alone, and then thinking about certain foods. And that's something else that we do and a modified approach does, like keep certain nutrients in mind. Like, for example, we feel like meat is a first food because of the nutrients it provides and iron. And so the two most important things, I think, is safety. Make sure baby can sit upright. You're using a high chair. Babies shouldn't sit in your lap at first, should never be reclined. And make sure they're offering foods. We do it in a way where it's like a protein food, a vitamin C food, and then a high energy food. So an example of just how do you build your plate to make sure baby is getting what they need. And the way we do that is typically how we would teach a family to possibly build their own plates. So, but yeah, I think those are really important. So safety, and then making sure if we're following this approach, and whether we are or not, never putting our hands in their mouth, because they need to be in charge of where food lands in their mouth, so they can gag if they need to, and that's a survival skill. So, and we're very lucky because my sister is a pediatric speech therapist and feeding specialist, and she uses this approach too with many of her kids that she works with, and she used it with her daughter as well. And we picked her brain a lot on that side of things as well.
Yeah. I think what's so interesting is the flexibility that sometimes gets missed, I think, among whatever method that you start with, that flexibility between if you want to do baby-led weaning, awesome. That's wonderful. But what I like seeing in your book personally is, what you just said. Start with a protein food, start with vitamin C and a high energy food, because those are the three main components where, that can get missed. I hear, all the time, oh, I'm starting baby-led weaning and I'm starting with avocado, sweet potato, and squash. And I'm like, well, where's the iron and the protein source?
Yeah. And that's so true. That's so true. And I had the best pediatrician when we were starting out, because this is in the book too, because I told her, I'm like, we're getting ready to start feeding Cece. We're going to use a baby-led weaning approach, and we're probably going to do steak. She was like, oh, good. The recommendation is to start with meat. And I was like, oh, hallelujah, Dr. Julie. Thank you. Yeah. Because here comes that protective factor again for me. I was like, well, good, because that's what we were going to do anyway. I'm glad you agree.
Yeah. Which is great. Now, you are very flexible in the book with modifications and very good at teaching, not only safety, but the nutrition component, which many of us really appreciate, I'm sure. If you have a mom who wants to do both baby-led weaning and the spoon, what would be your top tips for her?
Well, and that is really a necessity for, I would say, most people who are doing that, especially if most moms go back to work and around when baby is actually transitioning. So we have an example of this from one of our moms in the book and we also have letters that you can use for healthcare providers or say mother-in-law or whoever is helping with, or childcare providers, whoever's helping with baby is, what we would like is if you could load the spoon for them if we're spoon feeding and then let them do that. And if that still freaks people out because there's still people who just can't wrap their head around a baby feeding themselves, then if they do spoon feeding, only recommendation is to let them be in control. Please pay attention to and be responsive. So if they are pursing their lips or turning away, then know that they're using their own cues to say they're finished. So just letting them know, let baby be in charge of how much and if, and they don't have to finish anything. But yeah, it's so you can I sent foods that were obviously to be picked up and eaten. There was no spoon in there unless, say, I sent a yogurt. And if they wanted to help Cece and she picked up her own spoon and they helped her here and there, as long as they knew to let her say more or less and stop, then you can definitely use them all together. And that's really a necessity for most parents to be able to blend the two.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Good stuff. Really good tips. Okay, let's switch gears to the healthy relationship with food component of your book. And as we touched on a little bit before, I've heard Born to Eat be described as more than a baby-led weaning book. Can you explain what is implied? I know you talked about boosting the family's healthy relationship with food, setting the foundation for baby, but carrying that through to the family. Let's dig into that a little bit.
Well, when Born to Eat was born, we came up with key values at that point. Like, what are the values? Like, what is the point of this philosophy? And I can just give you those. And it's, eat whole food as often as possible, from developmentally appropriate through adulthood, honor and support self-regulation of body nourishment. When possible, eat as a family, be present and purposeful with food, and support a healthy body through body confidence, trust, and gratitude. And those are really the values of the whole book, the whole philosophy. And so, yes, it's a book about baby-led weaning, but it's just so much more because it's about cultivating something that is already there and hopefully bringing parents who have lived in diet culture for so long, bringing them back and maybe having kind of a Control-Alt-Delete for themselves because they can watch this perfect little self-regulator, trust their own bodies. And if they can do that, then maybe they can think about, so how can I support this by trying to regain that for myself if that's what I need? So it is. And I'm really lucky that many of my colleagues in kind of the eating disorder world and health at every size and non-diet approach have really liked how the non-diet approach flies under the radar through the book. And we were really, that was not an accident. Mm-hmm. It was definitely doing what I do. That was definitely not an accident. But yeah, it's hopefully a philosophy that can help bring body trust and intuitive eating and a kind of this family food approach back.
Mm-hmm. I think, in my experience, what I see so much is just a lack of trust on the parents' part to really allow their child to explore food, to take as much as they want and need, and to really be hands-off and not say anything, not worry, not fret. That trust is missing for so many people. And, I don't work with adults, but I think to myself that, if you don't trust your child, you probably don't trust yourself. And It's sort of the same thing. If you can't love yourself, you can't love another. There's a relationship there. And it's very hard. It's very hard for a lot of parents. There's a lot of obviously barriers and obstacles in parenting that, exist that complicate the entire scene. But that trust, that level of trust, and even maybe if you don't have that trust, just being open to learning how to trust can be a really good step for parents.
Yeah, exactly. We before school started for Cece, we have permission and used in the book the Lunchbox card from Dr. Cacciarel from her book, Love Me, Feed Me. And it's in her book, and I printed it out and I wrote in Cece's name. And basically it says, please, and this is the short and sweet of it, let Cece be in charge of what food she eats out of her lunchbox in whatever order. I trust her to trust her body and to make the decision from what I packed. Thank you. You can open containers, blah, 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 blah. So it's just really short and sweet. And Cece's pulled that out 2 to 3 times in the last 2 years. So we use it because there have been times where people will say something to her about what food she should eat first. And so people were, you're right, we posted that. So we posted that on our social, and it went crazy. And we got mostly really, people were like, yeah, this is great. This is supporting body trust and this is wonderful. And then we had people who just lost their minds over it. I mean, just straight up lost their minds over it. And like, you can't trust a kid to, of course they're going to eat cakes and cookies and all these things first. And I think the thing is, people are so black and white about it. Here's what it says. And I had to just make it real clear in this one thread that just kept going. What it's saying is, I'm not saying pack cakes and cookies and everything all in my child's lunchbox. I mean, I'm in charge of what I pack. What it really says is, I need you, lunchroom monitor, whoever, to keep your idea of what is healthy out of my kid's lunchbox, because that's my job.
Well said. Well said.
And I think what it comes down to, and people are like, well, what happens when the kid is so grouchy in the afternoon and the teacher has to deal with it? I'm like, well, that's a behavior issue. And both my parents were teachers and my sister works in the school system, and Wendy Jo was a teacher. And so people were like, y'all have no idea. I'm like, we do. We grew up with this. We do. And I've like run it past my mom and teachers and my little girl's teacher. And it's like, we as parents, we get to decide what's healthy. That's up to us. And we make that clear in the book. It's like, that is, you trust people to help you, and then you make your own decisions. And we instill that in our kids. And my little girl gets to make her decisions based on what she learns in the family. And if she has a behavior issue because she didn't eat, then that's a behavior issue, and absolutely talk to me, but don't tell her not what to eat first. Yeah. Because that's my job.
Yep. 100% agree. And I think that gets lost on a lot of parents, that they are in fact in charge of what goes in that lunchbox and what goes on that dinner table and what's being served at breakfast time. Like, that's the control you have, and that's about all the control. And it's not really control, it's just you in charge.
Yeah, it's the division of responsibility, which we talk about all throughout the book, Ellen Satter, and like the parent's job and the kid's job. And you're right, it goes back to the people who were just like, couldn't believe that such a card would be in a kid's lunchbox. It's not like it's going to be waved in somebody's face. It's used here and there. But the people who couldn't believe it, I'm just thinking, wow, if I were sitting across from you in my office, would you be the person that I would be talking to about body trust for yourself? And I think it is. I'm like, if you have an adult who doesn't really understand their own self-regulation, then it makes sense that they wouldn't believe a child could do it for themselves.
Right. And plus, I think that you have to have the infrastructure set up within your own home to be able to put a note like that into your lunchbox, because it's the people who don't have that infrastructure, who do have just cakes and cookies and packaged snacks as their meal components. They're the ones that wouldn't be able to put a note like that in their child's box, because their child wouldn't have the right foods to eat, or, not the right foods, but the balance of foods to eat that would support their health.
And that's so true. And I think, that this whole big conversation that just kind of blew up and we had no idea, it brought a lot of good topics to light, because what we realized is people were kind of talking about that kid you just mentioned, like, say it's all this package, this, that, and the other. And I work in my little girl's classroom and I see what kids bring. And so there are situations like that, and then they're very balanced. But I think what we have from a parental standpoint, and just, I think, a kind human being standpoint, I think we have to think about eating well and having balance is sometimes privilege. It is a family who has means, and it is a family who has education. And so, that's a really big part of it. So I think we've got to work with families. I think we can talk about, what does balance look like? How can we be more helpful? And without what if that's all that kid has? I don't want to shame him for that's all the kid has, So it's like we're going to have to find some balance here because I think balanced lunches is not everybody gets to experience that. And we're going to have to find a way to kind of work that out for everybody.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's exactly what you say. It's meeting people where they're at. I mean, I just had a client today that is a very picky eater. We've got 10 foods to work with, and there are no fruits and vegetables on that list. And yet he still has to go to school and take a lunch and take a snack and take another snack. And it does not look like a balanced meal, but it's the best that we can do right now for where we're at.
Exactly.
What would you say some of the other things that maybe parents need to watch out for that could interrupt that budding relationship in their infant with food? Because it is a budding relationship. They're being introduced to a variety of different foods, textures, flavors. It's like a little flower that's growing and blossoming. And so what are the things that can really interrupt that, where parents could be making some mistakes or getting in the way of that relationship?
Well, I can tell you, Wendy Jo would say, don't say yucky. Don't say, ooh, you don't like it just because you're reading their face. I'm like, kids make all kind of crazy faces, and it doesn't mean that they dislike something.
True.
So she would say, don't say, ooh, you don't like that. That would be the first thing I think she would say. But I think that's true. It's like, be aware that it can take 10, 20, 30, 40 introductions of a food. We used to say like 10 to 15 or 15 to 20 introductions, and having worked and discussed a lot of this with the feeding doctor, Dr. Cacciarao, she mentioned to us, she's like, it's really important that you don't put a cap on that it can take a lot more for some kids, particularly picky eaters. And so I think that's one thing, is to just keep trying and don't be afraid to season your food like you normally. Like I make steamed green beans with butter and salt, and we'll feed it to Cece without and with, and I'll try a different way. So don't just assume they don't like something because it didn't work the first, 1 through 5 times. Keep trying that. And then even if you don't like something, this is a wonderful time to maybe reintroduce it, because I do work with adults and adolescents and kids, and you get those adults or the parents that I'm sure you get in your office that are like, yeah, I don't really like X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, so when was the last time you tried that? Trying to, open their minds about variety. And then I don't think parents should, or caregivers should, really eat separate meals. We have a great relationship with food when we witness others with that. And so sitting down and if you're demonstrating, how do you eat that green bean? What's that like? So I think being present is really, really important, and not assuming they dislike something, and being willing to try. And sometimes if they eat nothing, I will say, parent, that's when we really start to push. But the research suggests if we start pushing or restricting, the opposite usually happens. So if we push, they eat less. If we restrict, they'll find a way to get more of something else, and that really turns into something very, very dangerous and scary in adolescence. So I think controlling behavior it backfires. Mm-hmm. So that was a lot. There are a couple watch outs there.
Yeah. And I think also, just to add to that, when you push, it's not always going to backfire. Sometimes those children do please their parents and learn to overeat.
Absolutely.
And learn to ignore their appetite cues. So pushing is not a good thing for most children.
On the other side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All good stuff, Leslie. Anything else you'd like listeners to know about Born to Eat, or any other stuff you're working on?
Well, we have some more Born to Eat stuff in the works. So I'll definitely put that out there. We're super excited. The book is going to be available in Spanish pretty soon. Mm. That was very exciting. We have recipes and other fun things coming on our website, which is just Born to Eat book. And then all of our social is Born to Eat book. So, but we will definitely keep everybody up to date on what we're up to with social. It has been a wonderful challenge to write a book with a co-author who lives in Europe. So we were together and we did a lot of stuff together back in June. That was the first time we were together actually in 2 years. So, but yeah, anything we have coming up, we'll keep everybody up to date via the website and social.
Awesome. Well, Leslie, it's so wonderful to have you on the show. I think my listeners will have learned a lot, and I will most definitely include all the links to your social, your website, the book itself on the show notes, and I hope everybody comes and checks you out.
I sure appreciate it.
Take care.
Thanks so much.
Well, folks, that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Leslie. I really appreciate the added dimension of building a relationship with food through feeding and eating, and I think both Leslie and Wendy Jo have done a great job of showcasing this throughout their book. You can get more information about the book on their website, www.borntoeatbook.com. You can join their Facebook page, Born to Eat Book, and you can certainly purchase the book on Amazon. Don't worry, I'll include all these links in the show notes, so be sure to head to my website. One last thing, I'd love it if you help the Nourished Child podcast grow. You can do that by writing a review on iTunes, which is easy to do from your phone or your computer. Head to iTunes Podcasts and search for The Nourished Child, and you can rate and review right there. You can also subscribe to the show on iTunes, Android, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, TuneIn, and more. As always, thank you for joining me today. I am so very glad you were here. Please be sure to give the child in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child Podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child, inside and out.